supported us to organize this activity, international webinar. And the second to the invited speaker, Mr. Sim Timothy, who has prepared to be speaker and as resource person in this activity. My thanks also to all board of committee of IKA UMP and all participants of the webinar, and also to all sponsors as well. I do hope that this webinar can be one of the ways to find wider horizons to develop new paradigms in teaching English, especially in the new normal. That's all. Thank you for your attention. Wal-'afu minkum. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, the participants of this webinar, we come to our today's main agenda, that is webinar entitled Teaching English in the New Normal, and presented by Sim Timothy from University of Delaware, New York. And the moderator of this webinar is Bapak Saifur Rahman, PhD. As your information, Pak Saifur Rahman is Vice Dean of Academic Affairs Education Faculty of UMP, and he is also lecturer in Magister of English Education UMP. Bapak Saifur Rahman, it is time for you to lead this webinar. Time is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina may yahdihillahu fala mudhillalah wa may yudhlil fala hadiyalah. Ma ba'du. The Honorable the President of IKA UMP, Pak Dr. Andes M. Johar MPD, the Honorable the Head of this committee, Pak Anton MPD, all of the committee, the board of IKA UMP, Ikatan Keluarga Alumni Universitas Muhammadiyah Purwokerto. First of all, thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, because of His blessing and mercy, we can gather here in the webinar. And then today we will have an outstanding speaker. He is St. Timothy from University of Delaware, New York. I would like to read the summary of the qualifications of Mr. Timothy Stelfox. He concerns on the dynamic and decisive leader with the priorities in the student-centered environments to increase acquisitions of the course contents, and then also promotes positive student-teacher relationship to maximize student academic achievement, involvement, and motivations. Professionals with a good organization skill and has experience coordinating various projects simultaneously. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give a fully time to our outstanding speaker, Mr. St. Timothy Stelfox. Time's yours. Mr. Timothy, can you hear my voice? Good afternoon, Mr. Timothy. Yes. Okay, we will wait for Mr. Timothy. Anton ke sana. Ada. Oh. Mr. Timothy? Hello?
Okay, hello.
Hello?
Are you there?
Hello, Mr. Timothy?
Hello, can you hear me?
Good afternoon, mister.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Yeah, we can see you now.
Good.
However, we still cannot hear your voice.
Okay. How
Okay,
about now?
sorry for the technical problems.
Understandable. Can you hear me now? How about now?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Timothy.
Good afternoon. Good, you can hear me.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I will be
Yes. Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Timothy.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good, you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
Okay, yes, we can hear you now. Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Timothy.
Good afternoon. Good, you can hear me.
So, what I would like to discuss today
Good afternoon, Mr. Timothy.
so what I would like to discuss today is the situation of what happens when we have this concept of teaching online, where we have to turn our lesson plans from a traditional classroom Hello? I think I was muted for a minute. Traditional classroom.
Sorry for the technical problem. Okay.
I think I was muted for a minute. Traditional class. Hello? Okay, so maybe if everything is okay, I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, but hello? Okay, so maybe if everything is okay, I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, but okay, hello? Okay, so let's discuss what some of the problems we Hello? So let's discuss what some of the so when I was preparing this workshop, I asked ahead of time to get some questions that might be related to the questions you were dealing with in this pandemic era. So I had 5 questions proposed to me, and I wanted to base this presentation around these 5 questions. The first question was, what is the global implication of the pandemic in teaching in a foreign language context? The other question that was proposed to me is, what aspects of the students' English skills needs more attention?
Iya itu sudah kan berarti cuman
The
nggak
third
bisa suaranya
question
nggak bisa di
is,
ruangan
what is
ini
the
ya.
role of IT,
Berarti peserta
information
kelas sudah bisa
technology,
menyimak
for
ya.
teaching English online? The fourth question is, what evaluation model should be used in English teaching in an online setting? And last, how to empower our So a couple of the things that I read were this article from Esl in 2020, who said that she's going to make 5 predictions for what it's like to be teaching in a post-COVID situation. So the first prediction she made is that online learning is here to stay. What this means is, while it's not perfect and we're still trying to figure things out as we have technical problems, even today is a perfect example of technical problems, online learning can provide flexibility for the students to learn at their own pace. We have to think about the classroom in a different paradigm. So we have to shift what we think about the classroom from teacher to student, direct interaction, to something a little bit different. This is going to go to the next point of self-directed learning. We need to provide the tools and the materials for our students so they can direct their own learning. The students need to be able to guide their own educational journeys while working at their own pace. So they can work at their own pace, and if they're learning something that's difficult for them, they can go back and better absorb the material that they are learning. And they can even go back to previous lessons if those tools and materials are made available to allow the students the opportunity to reinforce the material that they've previously learned. This is something that cannot be done in a traditional setting, but it is definitely something that can be done in our more online classroom, something that we provide the materials and let the students work at their own pace. Another thing, and this is a trend that also happens in your traditional classrooms, is the idea of gamification of the learning process. And this time, we're looking at the idea that we're going to need to find more interactive games and gamified learning to help increase motivation and engagement with our students. One example of this could be taking traditional board games, and I can show you an example later of an English board game that English board games that you can play with the whole class, where you use a share screen, like I'm sharing the slides right now, and have the students in the conference answering the questions, and each student gets a turn. You can also look at gamification in terms of using quizzes or Kahoot as websites that provide some kind of competition for the students to help increase their motivation and engagement of the materials being taught and learned. We're also going to start using more non-classroom resources. So there's a variety of online tools and apps that are targeted for language learning. Sure, many of you are familiar with the variety of tools and apps that are available. And we can start to find ways to incorporate that into our lesson as supplemental instruction. So maybe part of the grade would be monitoring a student's use of Duolingo, or monitoring students' use of different websites that provide readings or video or listening activities for the students to practice their English, and we monitor their score by allowing them to use the modules themselves. This is more like a flipped classroom or blended learning, but instead of having it in the classroom, it's focused more online. And another thing for post-COVID learning is the idea that we should start teaching digital citizenship, and this might be not necessarily language learning, but just in general. Just as we teach our children and our students to be good citizens in the real world, we teach them manners and virtues that make them a good citizen of the real world. We should also teach them how to be good citizens in a digital world and what that means as well. And things like anti-cyberbullying campaigns could be an example of that, or just how to act in an online setting where you want to make sure that you are being a good digital citizen. So while we're looking at what are the global implications of the pandemic in teaching a foreign language context, we have to think about what this means for our students and for ourselves, and the issues that we might be facing. So as teachers or as students, the students are having fewer opportunities to actually practice the target language face-to-face, which can cause some troubles. When we don't have the physical classroom, students might not find the time to practice their target language. And this is something that we can supplement with online apps and websites that are helpful for language learning. So what we want to do is provide opportunities in the forms of projects or assignments and supplemental apps that allow more time for the students to practice what they are learning. It's very difficult in an online setting where the teacher might take up most of the time, or there's technical problems that take up most of your classroom meeting. So you definitely want to find ways to let the students practice in an offline setting or an outside of the classroom setting, maybe by having projects with their fellow students, or like I said before, supplemental applications or online websites that provide extra practice that you can monitor and assign a grade. Another issue is lost milestones. This is happening all over the world. So any achievements that were made prior to the pandemic could be lost as teachers and students are trying to transition into this new way of learning. So what we might want to do is allow time to reteach material or to support what was already learned so our students can bounce back. And this is something we might need to do as we're starting to enter the classroom again, is take a look at what was taught in the past 3 months that maybe didn't really get a lot of attention because we were dealing with the early stages of the pandemic and how we were dealing with the situation. So it's okay if we have to go back to meet those milestones, because we are realizing that students aren't meeting the same achievements that they had prior to the pandemic. Another issue, and I think this is something both teachers and students face, is just the idea of our mental well-being being impacted. The stress and uncertainty of these times can affect our students' well-being. which is reflected directly into their classroom achievements and their classroom participation. So keeping in mind that our students are people too, and they're going through this just like we are. And it's a good idea to take some time to check in on the students and be mindful of their situation. We are all feeling the same way. So, you know, part of your lesson could just be talking to the students and seeing how they're coping, or seeing where they are, if they're in a safe place, if they're with their family. I teach adults, so some of my adults were still in their cost for the last 3 months away from their family because they lived in maybe other parts of Indonesia. And so, you know, making sure that their mental well-being is taken care of as well is very important. It's almost like we're moving from teacher to counselor, but that's a very important concept. Now, us as teachers, we also face some issues as well. So we have new models with little direction, meaning for many of us, myself included, transitioning to online teaching is challenging. It is so new for myself, and I'm sure for you as well, because we're used to the traditional face-to-face meetings with our students, that there is not a lot of material to build on in terms of past experiences. We're really coming through this together for the first time, and we might feel directionless. And as schools and teachers are trying to figure it out, we have to realize this is going to be a trial and error process. We're not going to have it perfect right away, and to allow ourselves that flexibility to realize that, hey, it's okay if whatever we're doing doesn't work. If it doesn't work, we have to try something new. And that's the main concept, is that it's new for all of us, and we will get through it. We just have to allow ourselves that opportunity to try and make mistakes so we can learn and do better for the future. Another issue very similar to this is that not a lot of materials seem readily available. So we might be used to teaching in a traditional context with a textbook or a lot of handouts and worksheets that we can provide for our students. But now the materials that are available online might seem very limited, and the things that we have done in the past that worked well for face-to-face might not work well for online, and we have to figure out how to adjust for an online classroom experience. And at the same time, classroom management is very difficult. Even in face-to-face contexts, it's challenging to get the students to participate, right? Or to get the students to be motivated, or even to attend the classroom. And it's even more difficult now that students can easily mute themselves, turn off their camera, and walk away. I know I've had that happen to some of my adult learners, where they would check in at the beginning, turn off their camera, mute themselves, and then they would be gone for the entire meeting. And I would try to call on the students and they wouldn't be there. So I know that classroom management is very difficult in an online situation. So it would be something that I'm trying to figure out. How can I make a mix between online learning and things that the students would do in the off time when we don't have our actual meetings, that would supplement what we're doing in the classroom. So that way the students aren't, that way I can manage the classroom a little bit better for the students who don't necessarily participate. We have to remember that online courses are not the same as traditional courses. And what that means is, while we know this is true, it's obvious, online courses and traditional courses are not the same. It means that we cannot necessarily teach like we would in a traditional classroom. We have to restructure how we teach and interact with our students. So this is something I'm working on. This is something that I'm trying to figure out in this time between semesters at my university, where I'm trying to figure out how can I better teach and reach out to my students in this new model. Yeah, we know screencasts and Zooms are helpful, but we need to make sure our students can take the lead in the learning process. From this source, I wanted to quote directly from Pierce. Pierce said, instead of having students watch a screencast, have them create videos or a podcast. When students are creating their own content, they're constructing meaning and they have more autonomy over their learning. So this means make the students part of the process, make the students active, give them projects that allow them the time to practice and use their language, even if it's something that you need to assign a few meetings for time. And another issue that we face, and I know I feel this as well, is that we have teacher burnout. We're used to working on our feet. We're used to not sitting at a computer all day. And this can be a struggle with setting up our schedule for working from home and managing student communication, which leads us to burning out. And without that face-to-face interaction with the students, we might lose our passion for what we're doing. So what can we do to better ourselves? Well, one is to focus on the personal connection with our students first. I've said this before when we talked about the idea that, our students' mental well-being is being impacted. Maybe we need to check in with our students and make sure they're doing well and that they're in a safe space. At the same time, when we're working on our personal connections, we want to see how our students are doing with the work assigned. Let's not overwhelm them in an overwhelming situation. So let's not give too much work. Let's give meaningful work, but not busy work, to realize that the students are going through a lot of things right now, and they have many other classrooms and responsibilities. So when we do give work assigned, let's make sure it's something that isn't overwhelming. I found that it's better that I've cut my materials in half, and that has been really helpful for both me and my students. So instead of assigning the same amount of materials I would have in one meeting, I cut that in half and break that over 2 online meetings. And it's been very helpful for my students and myself to kind of realize that not everything that worked in a face-to-face situation works in an online setting. At the same time, when we do this, when we don't overwhelm our students, when we check in with our students, it helps to gauge our instruction as well and see how we are doing. So talk to the students, see how they're doing, and also see if they're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of work, if they're feeling that they can understand everything is less, or if everything is not clear. We want to empower our students to take charge of their learning. This means we give the students time to do something with what they are learning. Don't expect them to passively learn through a Zoom meeting or a screencast. We want to allow them the time to build something with their skills. So we give them group projects or activities that require time offline or in smaller WhatsApp groups. It's a good idea to split the classroom time between a Zoom and small groups, just as we would in a traditional setting where we would have teacher talk and then the students working. Maybe we would pause the Zoom meeting, close the Zoom meeting, let the students work for 20 or 30 minutes and then reopen the Zoom meeting, or split the time a little bit better and give the students some time, some meeting time as project time, and allow them to use apps and websites on their own. Keeping in mind, this requires some kind of check-in system. This requires some kind of way for you to monitor their progress. And some websites do allow teachers to monitor what the students are doing, or this might require you to have a quick consultation or have the students share a photo or a screenshot from their WhatsApp to you to show the progress that they're making. And this would allow you to give some feedback. Because now schools are focusing more on feedback and less on for their assessments. So some schools have been doing away with grades and focusing purely on feedback, more focusing on making sure that the students can understand what they need to do to improve without attaching a grade necessarily to it, because we can't control the student's environment. And some schools deem it inadvisable to assign grades during this period, so they focus on a feedback model or maybe a pass-fail model rather than assigning a numeric grade. In order to successfully focus on feedback, we want to make sure that we can create some rubrics that would identify strengths and areas of improvement that could be beneficial for both the teachers and the students. So we could come up with some kind of blanket rubric that would allow the teacher to monitor the student's progress and say, okay, this is where you are strong, this is where you need improvement. And if the students are familiar with that feedback system, it would be a very helpful tool to allow them to increase their productivity and to get better at using their language. Because we know feedback is the most important part of learning. So if we're optimistic, students will continue to work hard throughout this time period. So we have to be optimistic and give positive feedback and allow the students that as opposed to providing grades. A couple more tips that I found in my research is that it's very important these days that we continue to differentiate instruction, especially for vulnerable students. For the vast majority of the schools out there, and I'm sure you as teachers in your schools, this abrupt transition from online to online learning left little time for us to plan a strategy that could meet our students' needs. We were just kind of thrown into the deep end right away, saying, hey, you need to teach online now. And that was something that we need to kind of, now that we have some time, reassess and say, okay, let's try to think of different ways we can modify our teaching. So one thing is through differentiated instruction, teachers can work to ensure that the students on the margins, the students on the side, get the support they need by taking stock of their knowledge and skills. So by differentiating instruction, this means we're giving them choices, connecting the curriculum to their interests, and providing them multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning. This is something that you would have to consult with your students first, maybe have some kind of diagnostic and kind of see what your students' ability is before you can start to differentiate instruction, unless you've had your students before and you're really familiar with their language abilities. At this time, professional development is very crucial. So it's important that we build on our knowledge as professional educators. So by participating, for example, in this conference, it's very helpful for us to know and think about the things that make us better online teachers. We need to build our professional development opportunities to ensure that we can handle these challenges as best as possible. And the way we can do that is to also build a community of practice to share ideas. So I see we have 202 participants in this workshop right now. That doesn't necessarily mean all of the other people that are watching. There are a few people that are watching in groups of 4 or 5. So we have over 200 easily participants right now. It's a good idea that we build a community of practice to share ideas. Remember, you're not alone in this situation. We can come together, discuss ideas, share resources. We have limited resources, and it's a good idea if some people said, hey, I use this website, or I use this rubric for providing feedback, or I use this material in my classroom and it worked really well. If something works, please share it with each other. If something doesn't work, let others know what you didn't work, so others can avoid it and maybe modify it with a new perspective. This is the time that we work together for our students through building a community of practice. And that was my first question was, what is the global implication of the pandemic in teaching in a foreign language context? So another question that I had was, what should we really focus on in this, not just in this era, but what do students need to focus on? And I think reading and writing is a skill that most Indonesian students need to improve. Essentially, I found that listening and speaking, especially with my students, isn't that much of a challenge. I mean, there are pronunciation issues and there are fluency, coherence issues, and of course, vocabulary could be built on. But for the most part, students are very communicative. Their BICs are very strong. They have good communication skills. But when it comes to reading and writing, I find that this is something that really needs more focus. And this starts by building a community of readers, by incorporating more reading in your classroom, and encouraging the students to just freely write, to feel comfortable writing. So maybe you can have extensive readings or provide some readings for students and get them to really enjoy reading, using your classroom time as a reading opportunity. You can even maybe do some reading to students and they can read along. Allow the time for students to freely write and journal. So maybe you can say, okay, we're going to do a 5-minute quick write and allow the students to write whatever's on their mind in 5 minutes and then share that with the class. The idea isn't that they're looking for using correct grammar or using the best vocabulary or even having the best use of punctuation, but really that they're just getting the ideas that are in their brain out on a piece of paper, either through typing it or handwriting it. The idea is that they're starting to just practice to produce material. And I find that it's fun to use creative writing and poetry in my classrooms to really share and get the students motivated in writing. One thing that I do is an I am poem. And this is fun. You can take a look at this and when on your own, but you would just have the students write a couple adjectives that describe them, maybe a list of their family members, things that they like, things that they don't like, and then they would write those down and then they would share this with the class. And this is a good ice-breaking activity. This is a good first day meeting activity where you get the students to just kind of share a little bit about themselves, and you get them to practice their reading, their writing, their speaking, and their listening. You can have a quiz afterwards based on the I am poem. So maybe you have some question and answer like, who was afraid of ghosts? Who wanted to see Raja Ampat, at the end of the class, so that way the students, and maybe give them some rewards so the students can kind of pay attention and get to know their classmates a little bit better. I also find haiku writing is a lot of fun with my classes. So getting the students to write haikus is good because it teaches them syllabification, it teaches them the phonemes, and it gets them to use the language they know, the vocabulary they already know, in a fun context and a creative context. So we know the concept of haiku is 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable, and you might want to provide some examples, and then you get the students to practice and write their own haikus. I've written a haiku recently for my university's poetry compilation about the pandemic, and this was my simple haiku. Our communities grow closer despite distance. Compassion is key. So compassion is key. And that was something that I thought is fun to do with the students. Maybe you could have them writing a haiku every other meeting or every couple meetings, and they can share it with each other. They can post it, they can write a haiku, post it online, and maybe give some comments, or somebody has to write a haiku in response to their haiku. You can come up with a lot of fun variations on something as simple as this. Another thing you can do to encourage writing is picture stories. This is where you would show the students an interesting photo, give them a minute to study it silently, maybe have them take notes on the photo as much as possible. You can ask them some questions. You can come up with your own questions as well, but ask them, what's going on in this photo? What do you see that makes you say that? What might be happening inside the frame or outside the frame? What might be happening before this photo was taken, or what happened after this picture was taken? And ask the students to write maybe 8 or 10 sentences using the observations they've had, and then they can share the stories with the rest of the class. You can also have the students working in pairs to, you can have the students working in pairs to write this as well. And maybe they write a rough line and then rough 8 to 10 sentence story, and then have them go back and edit it so they can learn how to practice their grammar, their pronunciation, or their punctuation, and their spelling. So at first they're just writing 10 lines based on the picture, and then you go through and use it as a way to provide peer feedback, peer editing, and showing that writing is a process, not something that you do one time and you're finished with it. So this is an example of a photo that you might want to share with your class. And here we see in the frame, there's a man in a underpass, and he's playing guitar. He's busking. He's a street musician, and there are people walking by. And in this one particular moment, there's a lady who is looking at the man. We can see that there's some graffiti on the wall, so maybe the part of town is not necessarily a clean part of town. Maybe it is something that has low rent, and we're not quite sure. But what we would do in this is maybe have our students come up with names for the characters. They can call him Bobby, they can call her Susie, and we would write a story something like this. Bobby is a street musician who has always played his guitar in the afternoon. He loved his job performing for people as they returned from work. He did not know it at the moment, but his life was about to change forever. And then at that moment, the students would continue to have the rest of the story of how Bobby's life changed as he was performing on the street. So another thing you can do is what I would call video recount. And in video recount, what you do is you show the students an interesting video. I find that videos with little dialogue work very well. I love to use Mr. Bean because I think it's universal. The humor is slapstick, so the students can understand the humor. There's not much cultural differences with the humor. And what you do is you show the video and you have the students take as many notes and details as possible. You want to ask them a couple of questions like, what events happen in the story or in the video? What do you think will happen before or after this video? What do you think is the motivation of the main characters? And just like the picture story, you have them write 8 to 10 line recount using the observations they've made. They can write more and expand on the video. But what you can do is share their recount with the rest of the class. So I want to show you a quick video to help share this idea. So this is a Mr. Bean video that I like to use. It's Mr. Bean making a sandwich. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but as we can see, Mr. Bean is wanting to make a sandwich on the bench. He takes out his bread. use some scissors to cut it. So I'm not going to show the whole video, but I just wanted to just share that one part. And then what I would have is this would be good for teaching process or transition words and order of events in their video recount. So one day Mr. Bean was sitting on a bench and he was hungry. He wanted to make a sandwich. First, he took some bread from his jacket. Next, he cut the bread with his scissors. Then he got some butter out. Mr. Bean forgot his knife, so he used a credit card to spread the butter. So at this moment, you could share any video and have the students come up with a recount. You could have the students maybe come up with an alternative ending to a video. You could have the students come up with a prequel story to the video that you just shared with them. There's a lot you can do with videos. And this is something that you don't need to necessarily use your classroom time for. You could share a YouTube link to a video and have the students do it for homework, and then during the classroom meeting, they share their stories. You can also have the students working together in groups, so they have the opportunity to peer edit and come up with a more polished version as well. In terms of writing, another thing you can do is story circles. In a story circle, this is something where you would dictate a sentence and the student would write that sentence at the top of their paper. And then you can divide this into two ways. In the whole class, one student would say or write the next sentence. And then the next person says the next sentence of the story, and so on until every student has contributed to the story or the story is over. And then you have the students maybe read the completed story to the class. And this is something you could do in the Zoom setting, where you just have each student participate and contribute lines or sentences to your story. Or you could divide it into smaller groups and have students working in smaller WhatsApp groups and give them about 3 or 5 minutes to work. And each student in their WhatsApp group has to contribute a line to the story, line by line. Once the time is up, each group will then share in the Zoom setting the story that they created based on the sentence that you started. And this is something fun to do as maybe a warm-up activity, or maybe teaching new vocabulary, because you could tell the students each line needs to use a certain vocabulary word. So you can assign certain nouns or verbs or adjectives that you want the students to use. You could also use it for a grammar thing. You could say each line must be subordinate conjunction, must contain a subordinate conjunction or a coordinating conjunction, or every one line must have a relative pronoun in there. So not just having the students come up with the sentences, but thinking about how you can target their grammar and improve their writing and vocabulary as well can be critical. And this can be a fun thing that allows the students to create something as a class or in a small group. And it gives you some time to monitor their progress and see how they're doing. One thing I have done recently, and I will share this with you, is to create an online book with a dramatic reading. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the website Book Creator, but if you are, great. And if you're not, I will share it with you. and show you some work that my students have done this past semester. So I will share with you one of my class's book creator books, and I thought it was a lot of fun. Let me just share this. Okay, so this is Book Creator, and essentially what it does is it allows the students to add text and audio and video to a book that they can create. Now, I've used it for a couple of different resources. One, I've used it for short stories. So I had the students write a narrative short story and share it with the class in an online setting. So this one was called The Portal, and it was a fantasy story. And what I did is I had the students, we taught them the elements of a short story. We taught them exposition, character, setting, plot, moral. I taught them all of the things they need to know to write their own short story. And then I had them narrate the story on their own. I'm not sure if you can hear this. So I wasn't sure if you could hear this, but the idea is that the students would write this short story. They would add their own photos. They would have some creativity in there. And each sentence or each page was narrated, and they could speak directly into their computer to record it directly. So it makes it very simple to share their story. I've done this not just with the short story, but I've also done it with some more advanced classes. I can show you that one in a second. I've also had my students, you know, work on some other concepts using Book Creator. I find it to be a very fun website. The students can have a really good time adding their own creativity to something, and it gives them that autonomy. It allows them to take charge in the learning process. So rather than just reading and answering questions, I have them create their own stories as well. So the next question that I had out of the 5 questions that were proposed to me is, what is the role of IT for teaching English online? And I found from Fink's article recently that they wrote some advice for teaching online, and they started with some do's and don'ts. First is be prepared. Make sure the students have the materials in advance so they are ready. And make sure they have everything before starting so there's no wasted time downloading the PDF or signing into the website. And you want to make sure you maximize the amount of time in an online setting because there is always going to be some problems. You also want to clear your browser and desktop before screen sharing because students will see everything, and you might have some personal information on your computer or your browser that you don't necessarily want your students to know. You don't need to leave your email open. The students don't need to read your emails. So make sure you have everything on your desktop prepared for the classroom, because if you're screen sharing, they will see everything. It's a good idea to start your meeting with everyone muted and then ask the students to sign into the chat box by answering an opening question. Like this is like an attendance way or a way for you to take attendance. So you might want to start with maybe a basic question and see if the students can answer that. And that would be your way to take attendance. And also, it's a good idea to keep your students muted because there's always a lot of feedback or noise that can happen when the students are not muted. So you want to minimize that and maximize clarity of your teaching when you're using some kind of screencasting software. If you want, you can record all your sessions if you have the ability to save and record and upload your sessions so that students can refer back to what was already taught. You might not need to record every single minute, but it is helpful if you want to record maybe your teacher talking times, so that way the students can always come back to what was taught. It's a good idea for you to collaborate. I've said this before, work with fellow English teachers in your department, your country, or globally to find out what works and what does not work, so that way you can be a better online teacher. It's the idea of building a community of practice to share resources, materials, and ideas that is necessary. And give some grace. Allow yourself, and of course your students, plenty of flexibility. Many students are now taking on additional responsibilities to help out at home. Many students are, and teachers as well, are dealing with technical problems and other issues that really take up our time. And we have to realize our students are under a lot of stress, just as we are under a lot of stress. It's not a vacation for us to teach from home. It's not a vacation for the students to learn from home. And I know most of my students would prefer to see me face-to-face. I would prefer to see them face-to-face as well, but it's okay. We have to make do with the situation we have, and it's a good idea to give some flexibility, give some grace, and laugh at our mistakes. Our students need to know that we are human and we make mistakes, and it's okay to make those mistakes and just laugh at them and realize when we need to adjust what we're doing. Another thing you should not do is don't overwhelm the students. I've said this before, it's a good idea to assign less work than you normally would, because the students are going to take much longer to complete it due to technical issues, stress, and the challenge of having to learn mostly on their own without having that face-to-face interaction even with their peers. So give less time, give them less work than you would in a normal classroom day. Divide your work over 2 meetings if you have to, and because the students are going to have to relearn how to schedule and manage their time as well. And it's a good idea to use the chat box if the students have questions, rather than the students trying to get your attention in the face-to-face meeting. So making sure you refer to the chat box is very important, and that's something that's going to really help, because sometimes the students might not have a good audio connection, but they can, type in the chat box easily. Don't make assumptions. We have to take into account that our students now have other responsibilities when they're at home, that they have other classroom work, chores that they need to work with. So it's not like when they were in our classroom time where they just had the time that was allotted to be on campus. Now they have a lot of other things they have to encounter. So understand that they might not have direct access to a stable internet connection is also something very important. Many of my students had difficulties accessing the Zoom meetings, or at least staying connected to the Zoom meetings, because they were coming from areas where they didn't have stable connection. And myself, even I had issues where my connection would get dropped and we would have to come back. And so don't make the assumption that everything is going to work smoothly online either. Understand that we might not have direct access or a stable internet connection. So try to make a lot of stuff that can be done on their students' own time and then submitted to minimize these kinds of errors. And don't expect perfection. Remember that connections break. especially if you're trying to remain online for more than, say, 40 minutes. Zoom meetings are really only supposed to be 40 minutes at one, if you're using the free version. So don't be surprised if your connection drops. Just take it as the normal drawback of online learning, and it's okay if it's not okay. Students might also not have the same opportunity for projects, assignments, and practice as they did in the face-to-face classroom, so allow some flexibility and time for the students to do their work. Don't expect everything to be as perfect as it may have been in their previous online setting. So some advice for teachers for teaching online. Use fewer links for communication. So avoid overwhelming students with too many links to communicate. Try to make it easy by sticking to one central hub, like a Google Classroom or a WhatsApp group. Don't give the students, okay, here's my link for the Zoom, here's my link for Google Class, here's our WhatsApp group, and then here are all the different links that we have for our homework assignments. Try to put everything in one central hub. Something like Google Class I find is very helpful because it allows the materials that you're sharing to be set up in a calendar so the students can know what needs to be due when and where. And I find WhatsApp groups are good for small discussion, but not necessarily for assigning. So it's a good idea to use fewer links to quickly communicate. Also, regularly check in with your students. We've talked about that before. Make a policy of having at least one individual checking in with your student. Preferably video is okay. If not, you can just WhatsApp them real quick. Hey, how are you? Is everything going okay? Anything we can do to help you in this process? It can help your students to provide them an opportunity to share their thoughts, fears, and concerns with you one-on-one that they might not share in a larger classroom setting. Remember, you may be in a position to guide the students in the right direction in these uncertain times. So ensuring this allows the students to know that their voice matters, that you will listen, and that this can help towards keeping them in a positive state of mind. Offer at least one extra credit activity as well, because our students might not have the opportunities to share, practice, or have the quality of materials that they would have had in a face-to-face meeting. So it's a good idea to add in some extra credit materials for your students as well. Extra credit would also motivate them to perform better, because if they get demotivated by an assignment, maybe an extra credit activity would help boost their morale. You can introduce the extra credit component as a completely optional activity in the syllabus without proper instructions or course of action as well. It doesn't have to be strict like you would have for a project or an activity that you would have. It could be something a little bit more flexible. Remember, this can give your students opportunities to make up for their poor grades. A couple of websites, and I know we're running low on time for this, so I don't want to go through a lot of them, but some supplemental IT that you can use in the classroom is Quizlet. If you're not familiar with this, this is a good flashcard online system that also works as an app. And what you can do is set up a classroom Quizlet, so you would have a set of vocabulary cards for your students to work with. So as you're teaching new vocabulary, maybe each meeting you teach 5 or 10 new words, you can add them to the classroom word list, and you can monitor the students' progress using Quizlet. So this could be maybe something that their progress through the quizzes and the games on Quizlet could be something that could be used as extra credit. So maybe they get a couple extra points on an assignment they didn't do well on if they're doing really well in the quizzes on your classroom's vocabulary Quizlet. Another website that I found to help is EnglishCentral.com. And this is something that you can set up for your classroom as well. There is a free version and a paid version. The free version limits the number of videos you can use at a time, and that's okay. This is online supplement, and it would be good for receptive skills like listening, and it can be, and reading, and it can be used for productive skills like speaking and writing as well, because the way this website would work is the students would watch a video. They would first watch a video and then learn some new vocabulary. And then it would give them time to speak the speak lines from the video one by one or line by line. And the system will grade their pronunciation. And then there's also an online, this is more of the paid version, but they can have a one-on-one conversation with a private tutor. But at least the first 3 parts are free. And what they can do is they can learn, they would watch a video. The video would have subtitles in the bottom. And you can learn vocabulary words, for example, take a break here. So you watch the video, you learn the words, and then you would have the opportunity to, when you watch the video again, type in the words that you hear. So it allows the students time to practice their listening skill and then their writing skill, because they have to type in the word correctly with correct spelling. And then it would allow them to speak, to practice their speaking. So they would have this line and they would read the line. Most of us grew up in a world where we had basic civil rights, and it would grade their speaking based on a scale from 1 to 100. And this is something that you can provide your students supplement. Like I said, it's limited to the number of videos that you can watch per day. But it's something that you can do in the classroom. You can have the students do it for homework. I love using it with my classroom for supplement, and it really does help. Another one I'm sure you're familiar with is Esl Lab, Randall's Esl Lab. This is a listening material. So you can have a series of scenarios that usually involve 2 or 3 different people, sometimes 4 or 5 different people, having a conversation, and you would listen to an audio recording. It's probably about 2 minutes in length, maybe no more than 2 or 3 minutes. And there would be multiple choice questions related to what you listened or what you heard. And then there could be some other supplemental activities based on the listening as well. And this could be something you would assign, you could assign the students as well. You could say, pick, you know, for extra credit, pick 5 of these labs and show me your results, you know. Allow the students that time to do something outside of the classroom, but still online. Another helpful resource is the VOA, Learning English. So you can get a lot of your materials from here. This can help the students in all facets of what they need to learn. I can show you a live version of this. So the VOA right here website is very helpful because it has up-to-date news stories. So the students are always getting something fresh. And it has lessons as well, online lessons that are set aside for beginning, intermediate, and advanced. And it teaches, and they also have things based on science and technology, health and lifestyle, arts and culture. They have English in a minute. If we take an example of maybe a science and technology article, the students would listen to this 4-minute listening, or they can read the article that's provided. And then they can provide, and then there would be opportunities for some questions and answers, maybe not on that one, but if we take a look at some other things, how to pronounce different phonemes. This is a very helpful website. Another helpful website that I like is called ELLO. So English language or English listening lesson library online. It's a very, very helpful website. You can do audio lessons or video lessons. An example of the audio lessons might look like this. So there's over 15,000 audio lessons to choose from for different levels of students. There are games that the students can play, different scenarios that they can use. So this is a website that you could easily assign for your class and have the students do. They also have video lessons, which can help build your grammar, your vocabulary, your students' vocabulary, all the way from level 1 all the way to advanced level 7. So based on what you're teaching, maybe you want to teach a level 2 grammar, and there's all sorts of different grammar lessons here. Say, for example, we're using the simple present. They would be talking about daily routines. So John and Sarah discuss what they do in the morning. There would be the listening right here. There's a script for it. They talk about the grammar using the simple present, and they have a quiz as well. So I think between the ESL Lab, ELL.O, Voice of America, and English Central, you can find yourself a lot of good online resources that you can supplement in your classroom. I wouldn't use these as the only thing you do, but I would use this as maybe some homework assignments that you can check in and monitor with your students, or maybe a warm-up activity that you could have in your classroom. I find these to be very, very helpful. So the next question that I had is, what evaluation model should we be using in an online setting? So we've established that we're going to be teaching online for quite some time. We've established that there are resources to help supplement what we do in the classroom. And we've established that it's going to be something that is a challenge for us to work with, but it's a challenge we'll come together with. How do we grade our students? How do we make sure that our students are making measurable achievements? So this article I read from DeWitt, Assessment and Grading in the Midst of a Pandemic, took a look at assessment and grading. And for assessing the students' progress, DeWitt mentioned that it's a good idea to focus on feedback instead of applying a score or a grade. So when it comes to assessment, supporting the students' learning means focusing on feedback instead of a full score or a grade. An emphasis on feedback means we must plainly articulate our learning goals and the criteria we use to determine when student meets those goals. So this is done based on our standards and our achievements. We need to look at our syllabus and say, what is it that the students need to learn and what is it that they will be able to do with each meeting? And then maybe we can create some kind of simple rubric or identifying material, some kind of qualifier that would identify the strengths of our students and the areas of improvements that we can share with our students. So we need to say how they're making their goals and what they need to do to make sure they can make those goals if they aren't meeting their goals. This eliminates the idea of having some formative and summative assessment for our meetings. Instead, we're focusing on how the students achieve the goals and what they need to do to achieve the goals. So if our focus is on feedback, assessments become formative until the students understand the content. What that means is if our focus is on feedback, until the students fully get it, all assessments are formative. When the results show that the students understand the material, then the assessment itself becomes summative. We're not necessarily attaching a quiz or a grade. We're more or less just looking at feedback. Now, we do still need to grade because our administration requires it, right? So in addition to providing feedback, grading is something that is still around. And as schools have physically closed and moved to an online model, some schools decided to shift to a pass-fail model. The key to having successful pass-fail models rests in establishing clear criteria for what it means for the students to pass and making sure that those criteria are challenging, rigorous, and attainable. It does not mean lowering the standards to allow the students to pass, but it means being clear about what we expect our students to do in a given section and doing everything we can do to ensure that the student meets those goals. We can establish clear rubrics for the students that measure the targeted skills and mark those skills as achieved or not achieved. Examples of pass-fail grading schemes that are successful can be certificate examinations that we find in medicine, nursing, law, and the military. So we just need to shift our idea that it's okay to use a pass-fail model if we can, if we're in that situation. However, in situations where we don't have that flexibility, and if we have to assess, Nikki came up with some good ideas. Nikki says that if we should keep in mind the age of the students. The younger students are, the more simple we should provide an assessment. This means multiple choice over free response. Adding images or video to both engage the students and add another frame of reference to the words. If we have to assess, we should also allow the students to take the test offline if they do not have access to the technology. So finding a way to maybe have the student take the test on their computer and share screenshots with you is one thing we can do. We also, if we're using a timed test, give the students a much longer period to take the test in case of issues with technology or Wi-Fi. So instead of giving them maybe 100 minutes, give them 130 minutes to complete a test. If you truly need to time the test, consider having a practice exam. Ensure that the students have ample notice and perhaps give the test platform a test. Sorry, what I mean by that is give the testing platform a time to make sure it works. So test the testing platform. Maybe you can have a few students sign into the testing platform and make sure that everything is working and that there are no mistakes. You can do it yourself just to make sure everything works well. If you are allowing free response that are automatically graded, make sure to input a variation for the answers, allow incorrect spelling, add answers that are both have with and without articles, allow some grammar mistakes, because sometimes I find if you use free response, the student has the content of the answer, but because they added a misspelling or they didn't use the correct grammar in the way that I added the free response, that was still marked wrong or still marked as incorrect. So that's my point for evaluation, is really focusing on feedback. Pass-fail is not a bad idea. And if you do have to assess, be flexible. Be flexible. One thing that I do with my evaluation model is I tend to use more project-based learning with my classes. So I am focusing on feedback, and I have a rubric that it shows the measurable goals for different levels. And if that level, and each level is assigned a certain grade. So that might be helpful as well. Is I don't necessarily give multiple choice tests or open response tests. I might give essay tests if I have to, so the students can give a short essay, and that I find to be more helpful because it is more free response, and it does show that the students know the material. It is easy to cheat on multiple choice tests, especially if the students are doing it online and not under the supervision of your classroom. So I find something that shows measurable achievement through a project to be more valid, in my opinion, than giving some kind of multiple choice or open-ended response test. However, if you have to do it, just be flexible. The last question I had was how to empower the students. How to empower the students during online learning. And I think the idea here is getting the students to actively be engaged when they're learning from home, being a challenge. And I use games and group projects. So one thing I do for games, I'm sure you've used these apps, are quiz apps like Kahoot or Quizzes. You can set these up on your own. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And if you're not, they're pretty intuitive. You can just go to the websites and kind of click on them, and they'll show you, they'll walk you through it. I find quizzes or quiz applications to be a lot of fun and something that you can get the students into small groups, and it really shows how well the students can know the material and gives you immediate feedback as well, and it's a lot of fun. Another thing you can do is, this is available on americanenglish.state.gov, is activate games for learning American English. Something that can help engage the learner is board games. So what you could do is you can mark each board game. You can have the students maybe work in groups or individually, and you would roll the dice, and maybe a student who starts here would say move 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Had to double check my counting. So the question is what someone does in New York. So the student's response would be, in New York, someone might eat pizza and ride the subway system. And then maybe another student would say, in their group would say, in New York, people go to see the Statue of Liberty. In New York, many people take a selfie in Times Square. And then you move on, another group, they start here, maybe they roll 3. So they move 1, 2, 3 spaces. Okay, and then you would ask the next group, okay group, what would someone do on vacation? And then the group would come up with some sentences. They could say, someone on vacation goes to the beach, or someone on vacation goes hiking in the mountains, or someone on vacation does not leave their home and has a staycation. So this is something fun you can do. If you go to this website, you can download many example board games, and you can even create your own board game, and you can have your students create their own board games, and you can play them in the class as well. You can have your board games based on grammar points or vocabulary points that you're using in your classroom. A couple examples that I had students make in workshops are these. For example, what time is it? I've had students when we're talking about different time of day, for example, this one right here, what time is it? And they would say, oh, it is 15 past 3. Or what time is it? It is 5:45. Or 5:45. So you can even have the students come up and create their own board games that you would play in the class. This can be a lot of fun. And it goes with that idea of breaking from, instead of just playing a board game, have the students make their own board game. Instead of having the students just do something passively, have students be active in the learning process. And this is the one thing that I'm going to leave on, is group projects, PBL. I'm sure you've used project-based learning in the past. In a digital classroom, projects should reflect the digital environment. A couple examples I've had are Instagram shops, where I've had students create their own Instagram shop or make an online shopping catalog. I've had students do video biographies, like something you would see on YouTube, or create digital booklets. I'll show you an example of the students' Instagram, because I thought that was a lot of fun. Screen share. Yeah. So this was an example where I would have the students create their own Instagram shop, and they had to make it using their English, they had to make it very, very appealing for an online shopper. So this is a shop that decided to make their own clothing line, and they not only had a really good aesthetic choice, but one thing I would do is I would have them create promotional videos using their language to share their product. And they had to write descriptions, and I would grade them on their use of the descriptions as well. So as you can see, they're trying to promote their shirt company. And they show you how they make the shirt and how they use the shirt as well. So just to give you an idea of how I would grade something like this, I want to share with you my rubric. So for this rubric, I had a 5-scale rubric, and I graded them on a lot of different aspects. One aspect was their Instagram page, what was the aesthetic and the tagline they used. And then I made them come up with at least 6 different posts for photos and several different videos, and each one had a different grade attached to it. So that way the students could, that way I could grade them on how well they use their English in a speaking context and a writing context. So this was a very productive classroom activity, and it also reflected their life because they love to use Instagram, and this is something that they can use outside of the classroom, because if they want to start their own Instagram shops, and some of them already have, I've taught them skills that are going to be helpful in building a very aesthetically pleasing online shop. I also had the students come up with advertisements to share an online advertisement. So in this one, we were talking about alliteration, so that's why we have classy, classic, classy, curved table. And then they had to come up with an item description and like a sales pitch. And not only did they have to come up with these online advertisements. They had to give a sales pitch in the online meeting. So they showed this and they had to sell the product as well. So I was focusing on speaking in this material as well. So another thing that you can do is using Book Creator. You can have the students come up with maybe an online digital booklet that isn't just, what am I trying to say? That isn't just short stories, but also more detailed content. I want to share with you an example of what I mean by that.
Sorry, Sense. We still have 5 minutes to
In
go.
one of my more advanced classes, we were talking about water crisis issues, and we were talking about different issues related to water, such as filtering tap water in developing countries, or the fact that bottled water needs to be banned because it creates a lot of waste. So this group, one of my groups, we talked about and did some scientific research on how helpful filtered water is for our benefit. And I framed this whole thing as if we were in a group conference. So I'll share with you the example of the booklet first. So you can see they talked about what tap water is. I had the students come up with a few videos to expand on the points per page, and and they worked in a group on this and really came up with a really good aesthetically pleasing booklet. And I had all my students do this because in their groups, I had designed this final project as if we were in the 2020 Integrated English Conference on Global Water Issues. So this was due on May 21st, 2020, and I gave them a call for digital booklets, just like in conferences we have call for papers. And so I gave them clear directions, imagining you are attending a world conference on water issues where solutions are being discussed. There are many points of view. Below are some statements about the people attended had made before the conference. And these are the different 10 groups that I had, 3 students per group. So it was 30 students, 10 groups. And an example is bottled water is a necessity for some countries, or the supply of water should be limited during certain seasons. In their digital booklet, they had to come up with an introduction, a thesis statement, arguments, conclusion, and takeaway. And I gave them clear examples on what they needed to do. And I gave them their clear rubric on how they would be graded. So how they would be graded for their speaking presentation and how they would be graded on their written presentation. And I gave them examples on how to use the book creator. And that was how I proposed and pitched the project. So just to give you a little bit behind the scenes, I don't just say, hey, here's a project you have to do. I give them a little bit of a background behind it as well. And I think looking at the time, that is our 3 o'clock. So these are the references. And thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Sense. Wow, it's very amazing presentation. So we got everything from Sense. Give big applause for Sense, Bapak Ibu. Well, we come to the second session, that is question and answer. If you have questions, you can raise your hand. All of you, please. Or if you cannot raise your hand, you can type your questions here. Well, Sen, I think that I got the questions here from Ibu Sri. Ibu Sri asked about from Bu Umu Darojatin Wijayanti. So he said that we hope all the activities that you have explained now can run smoothly for the students, but nowadays everything depends on the internet. However, the problem is on our students. As we know that in Indonesia, we have a problem on the connections, and then also probably for the poor students who doesn't have the good, why is that? So they can acquire the money for their handphone. So do you have a solution for this one? So this is from Bu Umu Darojatin. Please, Sense. Sen, would you please unmute? We cannot hear you. Mas Abid bisa.
Thank you. That's better. I don't have the ability to unmute myself. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay, Sense. Yes.
I have the same problem with students connecting to the internet and myself connecting to the internet. I mean, I'm based here in Jawa Tengah in Surakarta. So my students during the pandemic, a lot of them moved back to their homes in Sragen and Wonogiri and places like that where the internet isn't always strong. So my solution in that situation was to assign a lot of things that they can, a lot of projects that they can work outside of the meeting time. And I wouldn't hold a full meeting. Instead, I would have like more consultations with students. And I found like things like WhatsApp meetings were a lot more stable than Zoom. I found that, especially if I was only meeting with 3 or 4 groups of students at a time rather than 30 students at a time, it was much easier to divide my classroom meeting into smaller chunks with my students. So instead of having 100 minutes with 30 students, I would have my 100 minutes with groups of 3 or 4, and I would consult on their progress. So I would set a big project, and I would set measurable goals for each meeting, and then I would meet with the students time by time for those measurable goals. And then that would be maybe every other meeting. And then there would be like some screencasts that I would share or some meetings where I would teach the content as well. But I gave a lot of time for the students to work independently, assigned more homework than I normally would have, homework that normally would be classwork. So that's what I'm saying. I cut everything in half and I gave, less is more. I gave less assignments and stretched it out over a longer period of time, making sure I check in with my students in smaller groups periodically rather than checking in with like the full 30 or 40 students at a time.
Okay, thank you, Sense. Cal, I think that we have a questions for Irma. You raise your hand, please, Irma. Oh, no. This one. Please, Bapak Ibu. So I cannot see your name because it is IMG. Hello. Anyone, please? Okay, this one, Sense. So this is from, this one from Linggar. Linggar, please. No? Okay. Fatma?
Yes.
Pagis, okay, please. Yes, please, Fatma.
Okay. Hello, Mr.
Would you
Sin.
please introduce yourself first?
Okay. Mr. Sin, how are you? I am Fatma from Universitas Muhammadiyah Purwokerto.
Okay, Fatma.
Hello. Yes. I'm a lecturer on Universitas Muhammadiyah Purwokerto of Fakultas Ekonomi and Business.
Okay, from Economic and Business. Okay, please, Bu Fatma. Your questions, please. Your questions, please, Bu Fatma. Okay, well, I think, Bu Fatma, would you please unmute? Hello. Okay, We got the questions from one participant, Sense. You said that,
Hello.
why is that? Okay.
Hello.
Okay, hello, yes, please.
Yes. Mr. Sin.
Yes, please, Fatma.
Yes. I'm Fatma. Yes. I have experience, Mr. Sin, when I as a teacher. Yes.
Okay, go
When
on, please, Fatma. Yes, go on, please.
when the medium I have essay question to my student, and that's amazing. That's very impressive because that turns out of a block of the copy faster from Google. Mr. Sin. Finally, when the final exam, I used multiple choice. I was confused, Mr. Sin, because it turned out they were sharing answer with their college very quickly. Then, how can I judge their competency, Mr. Sin? Finally, I met one more strategy with online quiz. What do you think about that, Mr. Sin?
Okay, yes, thank you, Bu Fatma.
Okay, you're
Mr. Sins,
welcome.
please. Would you please unmute, Mr. Sins?
Ano silok na Caca Caca. Yang salat.
Thank you for unmuting me. I do not have the ability to mute or unmute myself. Only the host can. So that's a very big challenge because we know the students will share their answers back and forth. So I think with multiple choice, normally I think it's fine if you're using it in a setting that's controlled. It's very hard in an online setting. One thing you can do is rephrase your questions from multiple choice into open-ended and try to think about questions that relate to the student's application of what they are reading or listening to rather than a discrete point multiple choice. Try to do something that is more open-ended and requires a little bit of critical thinking. Maybe like, what would you do if, or what do you think might happen next? And rather than what time did the person wake up, or when was breakfast served, it might be a little bit more helpful that way. Because if you're using something that's more open-ended, the students are using, and you're grading them on their ability to think and their ability to use the language, you're minimizing the amount that they would cheat because it's their personal answer, not a black or white A or B answer, but something that is a little bit more personalized and related to their thoughts and their use of the English language. That's the other thing. You would grade them maybe at that point on their use of grammar and punctuation and spelling and thought rather than whether it's a correct or incorrect answer.
Okay, thank you, Sense. And then we have more questions here from the audience in the group chats. From Miss Rana Hoirunisa. Miss Rana is the English teacher from Sambas Islamic Boarding School in Purbalingga. In my school, I have 80 minutes in every teaching meeting. So what is your opinion when I did an online teaching? Should I do the online teaching with 80 minutes too? Or it can be less based on your need of the material at the moment? Yes, please, Sense. It's something to do with the time.
I think time management is something that is the challenge all over, even in face-to-face. I found that it's best to maybe have an open, like at the time you would start, maybe have like 10 or a 10-minute opening with your students, and you kind of teach a material, and I would call that teacher talk. And then you would give them an activity to do, and then you would close the meeting, let the students work on the activity for an allotted period of time. It could be 10, 15, 20 minutes. Have everybody come back and share what they did. and then you can continue that until you reach your 80 minutes. But it saves a couple of things, but it might be better to divide the 80 minutes into chunks of time with the students and chunks of time where the students are working individually or in groups, and then you come back. So maybe, and at that time you want to be fast with your time. You want to be very mindful that you're using 10 minutes to sign in, set up what you need to do, and you can do that beforehand too. You can have the students work on the materials prior in your maybe Google Classroom, or share the materials to them ahead of time and being prepared, and then you can maximize the amount of time. But I personally find that if you teach the entire 80 minutes, you're really not giving the students enough time to practice on their own. It's better to maybe sign on, sign off, because also you find students, sometimes I found that my students who were living in areas that had poor or unstable connection could connect for 5 or 10 minutes, and then they would get kicked out and they had to constantly sign in and sign out. So I think we might need to find multiple approaches for it. And one would be doing away with the idea that we need to be face-to-face with them on a Zoom conference call for 80 full minutes, but instead maybe check in 2 or 3 times in that conference call. Also, by dividing it into smaller groups through, say, WhatsApp, you could have like WhatsApp groups, say with your students, say you have 40 students, you could divide that into smaller WhatsApp groups. You could have a face-to-face with the WhatsApp groups during that 80 minutes and make sure that you're targeting them better as a smaller group of 5 students rather than a larger group of 30 or 40 students. So I think that might be a better concept. That's what I've been doing, and I found it to be kind of working so far, because when I first started doing my full 100 minutes on the my full 100 minutes online, I found that the connection would always get dropped, students would get dropped, not everybody could hear me, and it just created a lot of technical problems. But when I switched to smaller chunks, like 10-minute chunks, I found it to be much easier to manage the classroom that way. And it gave the students time to work independently and maybe ask questions in a WhatsApp chat to me as they're working independently. So yeah, that's how I would handle that question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sens. Ladies and gentlemen, do you still have any questions from Pak Anton Zubair? Okay, Mr. Anton is from SMP Negeri 2, right? Okay, please, Mr. Anton. Yes, Pak Anton, please.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Sein. Okay, well, I think you have clarified clearly about how to teach in normal era, but you haven't clarified about the 5 questions: how to empower English teacher to encourage their students during new normal COVID-19, because I think because of the limitation of the time, you haven't clarified to us about it. Okay, would you please clarify to us about it, sir? Thank you, Mr. Sen.
Okay, thank you. So pretty much my point with that one was to start looking at fun and interactive ways that you can engage with your students, like the idea of gamification as a way to encourage the students. So I guess what you're looking for is maybe some advice or some words of wisdom that I could pass on to you. And my advice is relating to the students on their level. This is the Generation Z. This is the generation that is attached to their handphone and technology. So finding activities that would incorporate the technology, finding projects that relate to their digital world as they are digital natives would help you to relate better to them and to motivate them. The students don't want a dusty old textbook. They want a shiny, fresh app. So that's my word of advice, is finding a fun and engaging way to get the students to maximize their online learning. And I think that would require taking a look at the materials that I provided, things like Kahoot and quizzes, the American English websites, the different websites, and finding a way to make that engaging for your students. I think that would be my best advice. The other advice, and I think this is something that I have also touched on for engaging you as teachers, is to actively share your materials and to talk with each other. Don't keep a closed door of communication, keep an open door of communication with each other to say what's been working and what hasn't been working. Because, you know, I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of questions myself. What can I do to do better? Is what I'm doing actually working? I need to test it and experiment this semester when I'm teaching to see if this model works, because I've been only doing this for as long as you have, since we switched to an online model in March after the pandemic era in Indonesia was announced. I've been doing it exactly as long as you have, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So we're all in it together. That's my word of advice.
Okay, thank you, Sense. Okay, Bapak Ibu, do you still have any questions? We got the questions from the chat here from Pak Dodi Nur. He's the English teacher from SMP Negeri 5. Okay, during this pandemic, students are learning using the technology. As a teacher, we should also pay attention to the students' character. How do we build our students' character during this situation? I think this is quite similar questions with Pak Anton. Please, Sense.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what we mean by students' character. Are we talking about their moral character, or are we talking about their emotional character? Or like, so I think I'll divide it into two parts, because I really don't understand this student's character. I think it's a translation error, something that got lost. If we're looking at the student's moral character, this goes back to one of the points that was made in one of the articles I read about from the 5 predictions for post-COVID learning, that we should look at digital citizenship. So making sure that the students are using the internet, or at least their online persona is being presented in a way that we would still teach them how to be good human beings face-to-face. We would teach them how to be good digital citizens as well. If we're talking about character as emotional support, I think the best way to do that is to just have weekly check-ins one-on-one with your students if you can. Maybe just, hey, how are you? Is everything okay? Are you eating well? Where are you staying? Is everything fine with your parents? Do you have any concerns? And then even just asking them, how are you doing in the classroom? Are there any concerns about what we've been talking about? Are there any materials that you have questions or you're confused about? I think all of that kind of stuff is very helpful for building the students' their students' mental character.
Okay, thank you, Sense. And then I think we still have 10 minutes to go, but before we close, we still have presentations from the IDP, Bapak Ibu, from the IDP Jogja, Mrs. Elma. So she want to give you a little explanations about testings, the online tests. Would you please, Mrs. Elma? Would you please stand still, Sense? Yes. Okay. Mrs. Elma or Mbak Sophie? Hello? Mbak Sophie? Hello? Mrs. Elma, would you please raise your hand so we can identify you?
Halo Pak Sae, tunggu sebentar ya.
Yeah, silakan Bu Sophie. So Bu Sophie is from our international office. Please, Bu Sophie.
Hi Sin, thank you so much for your great presentation. Nice to meet you. And now we're going to have a presentation from IDP Yogyakarta from Mbak Elma. I think she already joined the presentation, but wait a moment, please.
Okay,
Okay, hi.
Belma. Okay, yes. Please, Belma.
Okay, hi everyone. Should I present in English or in Indonesian?
In English, please.
In English,
Yes,
okay, sure.
yes.
Okay, so hi, I'm Elma from IDP Yogyakarta. I'm the IELTS staff of IDP Yogyakarta. And in this occasion, I would like to present and introduce what is IELTS. It's just a basic knowledge about IELTS. So can I share my screen? Okay.
Yes, please. But yeah, okay, please. We only have less than 10 minutes, please.
Okay,
Elma.
okay.
Yes.
It's just a short knowledge. Okay, IELTS, most of you or maybe all of you already know about IELTS. It's an international English language testing system. This is the world's most popular high-stakes English language proficiency test for study, work, or migration with more than 2.9 million test takers in the past years. And if you're wondering who can take IELTS test, everyone can take IELTS test. Those who need to study or work abroad, they will, the universities or the offices, they usually require you to take an IELTS score. And there are 4 types of IELTS: academic, general training, IELTS for UKVI or for UK visa, and also IELTS life skills, as you can see on the screen. And then the components that is tested in IELTS tests are listening, reading, writing, and speaking. So we test all the skills that we need for the IELTS test. And if you are interested in taking IELTS test for applying master degree or a postdoctoral degree in maybe UK, Australia, or any country abroad, you can register yourself and pay for the rate is $215, or in Indonesia, the rate is this month is 2.9 million. And then this is the Ielts schedule in IDP Yogyakarta. We still have one date on July and 6 dates on August, 3 dates on September, October, November, and December. For those who are interested in taking IELTS tests, you can register yourself online through the website that can be seen on the screen. And also, if you want to ask more about IELTS test, you can contact me through email at agatha.febiasa@idp.com. That's all. I just want to tell you all about IELTS test that IDP Yogyakarta has.
Okay, thank you very much, Miss Agatha. Bapak Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, so this is the end of our sessions. But once again, please big applause for Mr. Saint Timothy, Bapak Ibu. So since on the behalf of IKA UMP, so we say thank you so much for your nice presentations, and then also for all of you in the audience. Thank you so much for coming in this webinar. And we also still have more webinar with IKA UMP, Ikatan Keluarga Alumni Universitas Muhammadiyah Purwokerto. Bapak Ibu, by saying hamdalah together, Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. So we close this webinar session. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. By the way, Bapak Ibu, don't forget to fill the attendance list. We have already sorted in chat. Yes, thank you, Bapak Ibu.